A gay couple has found themselves at loggerheads with Namibian laws that have prevented them from returning from South Africa with their newborn twins, Paula and Maya.
So Gebhardt and I are together since 2008, quite a while now. We met when we were studying, and we moved back to Namibia, well, back for me, to Namibia in 2011, where I started to work at NAST. And we got married in South Africa in 2014 because we had the wish to really kind of start a family and to do that as sort of comprehensively as possible. And of course, at the time, Guillermo was doing a PhD in South Africa, so we had sort of a foot in South Africa, and I have permanent resident status there. So we then subsequently also spent some time in South Africa. Guillermo was doing a PhD at UCT, and I did my own PhD and used my sabbatical leave for us to live in South Africa for prolonged periods of time, to further our studies. And it was in that sort of time that we even bought a house in Cape Town and sort of set up a semi-base there between Windhoek and Cape Town. So we were kind of going in between and started essentially the surrogacy process in around 2015, which led to our firstborn son, Yona, who is now already 2 years old, and who is, of course, part of this whole saga and currently with Guillermo and Windhoek. So essentially, I guess later we'll talk more about the details of surrogacy, because I think it's important for people to understand, the intricacies of that process. But what it led to was that we essentially had our firstborn in 2019. And at the time, we requested the Namibian High Commission to issue us emergency travel certificates for him to enter Namibia, for him to be able to apply for Namibian citizenship by descent. And that was granted, and we came back to Namibia and applied for citizenship based on my own citizenship. And that's where, pretty much the issues started, because even though we had a South African court order that had approved not only our surrogate, but has also directed that from the day of birth we are, the legal parents of the child. And even though we had a birth certificate, issued by the South African authorities that stated both as, parent A and parent B, these documents were not acknowledged by Home Affairs, and Home Affairs essentially requested a DNA test to prove that I, as the Namibian father, have a genetic link to the child, and only then would they issue the citizenship. Now that's where we disagreed, and where we essentially started the first court case against Home Affairs, which is that we are legally both parents. There is indeed a requirement under South African surrogacy law that one of the so-called commissioning parents has to have a genetic link to the child, right? But that is a prerequisite for the High Court to approve the surrogacy. And so, yes, one of us indeed has to have a biological link to the child, but that doesn't mean that the other person is not the father. We are both the fathers, and that's it. And so our contention with Home Affairs was that they essentially disregarded, an official South African birth certificate, which is never the case. I mean, any other birth certificate gets, used without any sort of DNA tests. I mean, no heterosexual couple will ever be asked to provide a DNA test, right? And secondly, the court order is also disregarded. So this sort of selective disregard for official documents issued by the South African authorities, and the need for a DNA test, which is not based in Namibian law, otherwise adopted. So if a genetic link was a prerequisite for parentage under Namibian law, then adopted children could never be recognized as rightful children, because there is no genetic link, right? So that genetic link was a sort of ad hoc made up by Home Affairs, because they basically cannot imagine that two men can be, fathers of a child. And so that's where our contention started. And of course, unfortunately, the justice system in Namibia is extremely slow. We were hoping that case to be heard in February this year. It's now been postponed to August. And because our twins' birth, with the same surrogate in South Africa, was approaching, we said, through our lawyer, So we engaged Home Affairs to ask if they would issue travel certificates for the twins again, as they did, previously, so that we can come to Namibia and await the outcome of our firstborn's court case to then take whatever appropriate next steps that we should take, right? And we thought that was a very reasonable, proactive step to take. But Home Affairs essentially denied that and said, no, we will not issue those documents until the court pronounces itself in the case of our firstborn, which is only in August. So, what really is problematic is that Home Affairs claims, they are sticking to the law, but they entirely disregard what the practical implications would be. So essentially, they're saying, you guys must just stay in South Africa, until August or something, or things like that, rather than being reasonable and say, come back to Namibia. We know your case is under revision, and then we see further, and that's really where we have grounds to believe that this is discrimination, and this is specifically discrimination of us as a same-sex couple and parents of the same sex. So we believe that really the instructions come right from the top, because the other cases that we're involved in is essentially the case of Guillermo's domicile, which was originally granted to him in 2018. Then a year later it was rejected because apparently whoever granted it in the first place did not realize that we were two men, which is impossible because we provided all the necessary information, including a marriage certificate. And so then it was rejected. He was not informed, and for more than half a year he was not informed of the outcome, and was then at the beginning of last year, sort of forcefully ejected from the country by a border, official in Katima, when he just wanted to go for a day visit to Victoria Falls and come back. He had to basically ad hoc, move into Botswana and then South Africa. He was there for 2 weeks before he could come back to the country, again based on an urgent court application. And since that time, our every action is being, entirely blocked by Home Affairs. So his permanent residence application has been rejected, supposedly on the grounds that he doesn't have, enough sort of funds for sustenance, which is, it's very strange because there are really no guidelines as to what is enough, right? There's no public knowledge of that. When we provided, through our lawyer, sort of evidence of additional funds and assets that we hold, in Mexico and in South Africa, and that are at our disposal, again it was rejected. And not only was it rejected, it was rejected within 1 day. And Home Affairs normally doesn't have a turnaround time of 1 day, right? There is no such thing. The immigration board would have to sit. And so we really have very good reasons to believe that this is a sort of very personal, attack on us at this point. And even a week ago, his work visa extension, which we were then forced to renew because his domicile is rejected, his permanent residence is rejected. Now even the work visa was rejected, and so he has been here for more than 10 years, and there can be no other thing than, this being like outright discrimination and sort of, total disregard for any, humanity that is here, for us. And so that's really where we're coming from, and why we also, in the campaign, I guess, really, saying the minister has to answer for this. I mean, he is ultimately responsible for all those instructions.
With Namibian society being as homophobic as it is, I asked Philip to share his experiences living as a gay man in this country.
So the typical thing is that this idea that Namibia is a Christian country, and hence the Bible doesn't allow for homosexuality and so on. Of course, I mean, I'm not a religious person, so I will not be able to provide you in all the sort of counter arguments based on the Bible, but I know that it's also, to a large extent, a book about love, about, treating, the other as you want to be treated yourself, and all these things. So I think that's, that is just being, sort of selective about how to interpret the Bible. Namibia is not a Christian country. Namibia is a secular state, right? I mean, we're free to, to practice whatever religion or non-religion we want to practice. So that is just not true. The Constitution, provides for freedom of religion. And so that's one. Then, of course, you get this idea that, children must grow up with a mother, because otherwise, how can they have, the full spectrum of human experience? That obviously disregards, even the thousands of single, parents that bring up children that are perfectly, capable and human beings, right? So first of all, it disregards, that. It disregards the fact that, our two parents, or, those are not the only people in our lives. I mean, our firstborn son is surrounded by, many incredible women every day. And, he learns a lot from everybody, not just from the two of us. So a lot of these arguments are just kind of very narrow and very, unreflected, really, about what society is about and how we live and grow up in a society.
In true Namibian fashion, the foolishness displayed by some of the comments on the story on social media have been disheartening, to say the very least.
So I think, those are some of the arguments. Then, of course, in our particular case now, a lot of people make it seem that we ran to South Africa because their things are, kind of legal that aren't legal in Namibia, and we're just, trying to now force this narrative onto Namibia. Again, that is not true. I mean, our struggle is not the first. I mean, Namibia has a long history of struggle for gay rights that goes back many, many years. And, we just simply stand on the shoulders of, of those who have been here before and who have, fought many different battles. And so I think that is, we lived in South Africa at the time we started the process. And now we happen to find ourselves in Namibia, and we believe these kids have the right to Namibian citizenship.
Admittedly, I'm not so woke on the issues faced by the LGBT community. And I asked Philip who between him and his partner the father is.
That's the core of the argument. Is a genetic link the only argument to claim parentage? What about adopted kids? What about, so many people, kids in Namibia that people, really regard as their kids, and they take care of them and so on. And yet there's no link. And if you ask me, if we would do DNA tests for, everybody in the population and find out if their, two parents are really their parents, I mean, you would find a whole lot of things that we didn't know. So that's not the point. The point is that we are the parents, right? And so, surrogacy law in South Africa indeed requires that at least one of the commissioning parents, it's called commissioning parents in there, has a biological link to the children. So when we first started the process, indeed we had a donated egg cell from an anonymous donor. That's the law in South Africa. That was then fertilized with our sperm. So yes, one of us is the biological father, but the other one is equally the father, because the court has declared us to be parents because we've met all the requirements, the legal requirements for surrogacy. Then the court has declared us the parents of the children born out of this process. And then only could we start the whole medical, process of undergoing IVF and so on and so on. What is clear is that there is no biological link to the surrogate mother. And so, this declaration of us being the parents is also, to protect the surrogate mother, because of course, she's also taking on the risk of saying like, well, I'm carrying a pregnancy. What happens if these people run away and leave the kid with me? Then, suddenly I have a baby that I never wanted. So all these agreements and the fact that the court has to approve it is exactly to safeguard that everybody in this equation is fully accounted for and protected and made sure that it does not get abused, because it is correct that surrogacy in some countries where it is less well regulated can be very much exploited, and especially where you have poor women that then get exploited for these purposes and so on. In South Africa, it is 100% regulated, very clear. The rights and responsibilities of every single party are exactly spelled out and approved by the court. So, that is also one of the reasons why we felt very, comfortable in doing this, because we knew that that it has, there are no loopholes,
A little birdie told me that Philip and Guillermo were only expecting one baby.
Well, not really. So the process, the in vitro fertilization and the subsequent process is such that legally, again, one can implant either one or two embryos, per sort of attempt, and that is because the success rates are actually quite low. So if you implant one embryo, the success rate is usually only about 30%, which is quite low, and so it is quite common that that one can then say okay, we implant two, and again it is up to the surrogate who carries the pregnancy to go in accord with that, because obviously it is a higher risk for her, and if she does, then one can implant up to two embryos, and then of course the likelihood is higher that you have twins, and that's exactly what happened with us.
We sit here and end the homosexuality. Yes, we condemn and reject them in albino recipients. No homosexuality.
Linda Baumann of the Namibia Diverse Women's Association is at the forefront of advocating for the rights of the LGBT community, and she schooled me on the intricacies of this case.
There's a number of issues at play here. Firstly, the fact that it's same-sex is a problem already, because in this country, the discussion around LGBT or same-sex issues or rights are very sensitive in this country and are very politicized. And then extended to that, looking at this case that came out of public, I think a month or two ago, there was a case of the Canadian family that also had surrogacy challenges here in the country. So for me, is within this case that we are faced with, it is a very sensitive case, because surrogacy it affects almost, in terms of the women, there's a high level of challenges that are also being faced there in terms of ensuring that women who are not married are able to do and have surrogacy processes in their lives. But in this country, we have the family law, and then there's the Children's Act, and then the fight right now is about basic recognition and fundamental rights for the same-sex couple that is also extended to them under Article 4 around the right to family. But the right to family in terms of the Constitution talks about men and women of full age. But then if you pull the Constitution to the legislative framework, then the family law and the Marriage Act is very clear about opposite sexes. So that also is at play here, which becomes very technical and also impedes on the rights of people who identify as same-sex in relationships. So in this regard, the couple is going to face basically direct homophobia that is not directed to their case. Because first, the direct discussion in this country, if you read the diverse newspapers, the radio call-in shows, it's all about procreation that is supposed to be between a man and a woman. It's all about the right to family. Why don't they stay there? Why did they not get Namibian women to be able to give birth so that they can have a formal process of a heterosexual process? So that also, for me, is very sensitive, because at the end of the day, they are disregarding and dehumanizing the couples as being humans and individuals in this country, just the fundamental basic right for them to be able to attain their full constitutional rights in order for them to advance their lives. So now in terms of them fighting for recognition, they're going to first have to fight the so-called interpretation of Namibian law around the sodomy law that the people claim that makes us illegal in this country, while we are not illegal. There's no legislative framework that criminalizes our being and our lifestyles and identities thereof. But the unnatural sexual offenses, that is the sodomy law, affects all Namibians, including yourself as a heterosexual person. But at the same time, people pull out one particular unnatural sexual practice and make that a legal status in this country to dehumanize this couple, and then they connect it to religion. Now, for me, as a parent who has raised children and who are raising wonderful men who have given birth to their own families, it's really painful to be able to see what the couple is going through, because people are not looking at this from a logical framework, but a framework that obviously there's no legal framework in this country that protects surrogacy. That's also another issue. So the baseline here for the same-sex couple is already problematic, because the right to family, and of course in the, there's a clause somewhere in one of our laws that gives married couples to be able to seek surrogacy fertility processes. But also there's no proper guideline that is able to protect the process of the couples and so forth. So basically this case is going to be taken back to basics. First, the question about recognition of same sex, because that is what people are basically politicizing in this country. The amplification and visibility about it is key, but Namibians, the way the media is and the way people are sharing their opinions, they're looking at this as it's not an issue, it's not a national discourse. Why? But it sets a precedent to equality and the rights for all people. Because me as a parent, why am I not being given recognition for raising a child that is today 28 years old? Beautiful young man, strong, and you know, but at the end of the day, my label as a lesbian woman is first tagged on top without looking around the well-being and the enabling environment that I've given these children. I'm a grandmother today. Does that make me less of a mother who is heterosexual? Whether it is by whether it's by me giving birth or me raising children, does not matter. It's about the well-being of the child. And if you look at this case, it is very sensitive in the sense of, yes, it is done outside the borders, what are our legal frameworks, and how does that intersect, but also extended to that, this is a same-sex couple. It now shakes the ball.